All right, we're going to talk about the technology and weaponry of World War I. You'll notice that this doesn't correspond to any notes or anything in your binder. It'll be valuable to watch and listen and think about this stuff. It is important in the story of the war, but you can just relax and think rather than have to worry about copying down any notes here. We're going to talk about a couple different types of weaponry here, weapons that are developed from previous versions of weaponry from previous wars, and also weapons that are invented specifically during World War I for problems associated with that particular conflict. So we're going to talk about artillery guns first. Of course, artillery guns are just modern day cannons. So the purpose is a long-range shelling of the enemy. If you were in a battle in the Revolutionary War, you could see the cannons on the other side of the battlefield. By the time you get to World War I, they're so powerful they are miles behind the line. So they are firing and firing and firing, and there's nothing really you can do about it. You can't reach them with your weapons. You can't disrupt what they're doing. So one of the defining characteristics of World War I is just the constant shelling. It can happen out of nowhere. You hear the whistle of the shell coming in overhead. That's your only warning. And nothing's going to stop it beyond their own supply or maybe technical malfunctions. At the Battle of the Somme, they tried to use 1,500 of these heavy guns to just obliterate the German trench in the hopes that there wouldn't be anything left of them over there and be easier to take their position. We're going to talk in a minute about how that worked out. So again, big guns, that's the whole point here. Heavy, hard to move. A lot of times they had to be towed by horses, which is an interesting juxtaposition of modern technology and older technology. Put on a rail car here for the bigger guns, which allows it to be moved, but kind of does limit where it can go because it's limited to being on a railroad track, obviously. But if you look over here at the size of that shell, my goodness, that's going to do some damage. You can see these guys here aren't even wearing shirts. They're clearly not worried about defending themselves. They're just doing a job. There's also this detachment from what they're actually accomplishing. People are potentially dying as a result of their actions, but it doesn't seem like that. This isn't exactly hand-to-hand combat. It's easier to divorce yourself from what you're actually doing, which contributes to the horrible nature of World War I. Got to get it up that hill somehow, so grab some rope. You can see the size of that shell there, and the capacity for industrial societies to create these killing machines explodes during the war, so to speak. And you can see the capacity for all of these, the manufacturing of all of these shells, but this is half of one production floor of one factory in one country. If you extrapolate that out, a lot of potential death there. One of the other concepts that's new to World War I is a total war. War isn't confined to a battlefield anymore. It could be anywhere. We see civilian casualties increase dramatically in World War I and skyrocket in World War II. And that's kind of a defining feature of World War I, the effects of artillery fire. Machine guns also are not brand new to war, but they're further developed in World War I. They're primarily a defensive weapon at the start of the war because they're really heavy and get really hot, and you can't really rush into battle with them. So if there's a place you want to defend, you set up your machine gun and fire at anybody coming at you. Like a lot of new and developing technology, they were unreliable, they broke down, need a lot of maintenance. But if it was working, it's the same as AD riflemen, so there's a clear advantage there. So you have a spotter, a guy who fires, a guy who reloads, a small group of people there. Wouldn't maybe need 9, but obviously these guys are just posing for a photograph. Maybe don't shoot in a trench either. That would probably be very loud and ruin your ears. Tanks are also designed during World War I to combat trench warfare. How do you get across no man's land? Well, maybe a giant mobile metal box. But they also didn't really work all of the time. and more than useful in World War One, they showed how useful they could be and become much more useful in World War Two. I mean, that is a hulking machine right there. Um, Not very fast, no, not very mobile. I mean, how fast could something like that really be? There's one that's a little bit smaller, more maneuverable, but again, fairly ineffective. My God, that thing's huge. All right. Airplanes are new to warfare because they're fairly new in existence. Um, don't think fighter planes, although there were fighter planes. They just kind of fought each other. To what end, I don't know. But at the beginning of the war, they were useful. Like throughout the war, they were useful in this way, but as reconnaissance, seeing where the enemy was and making using that to make plans, that they're definitely useful there. In terms of firepower, we're talking pistols and rifles at the beginning of the year war. You don't necessarily, well, I'll skip ahead here. You don't necessarily want to put a gun right here. Even if it's in the pilot's eye line, it's going to shoot the propeller off, right? So they got to figure something out. You can see this plane is going to be fairly lightweight. It had to be because the engines weren't powerful enough to lift a heavier plane. The wheels are going to be fixed down and not like have landing gear that goes into the belly of the plane, so that's going to create drag, so they can only go so fast. You can see here they tried to put the gun at the top of the plane, but that's tough to aim. Even if you factor in that discrepancy between eye line where the gun is, plus the vibration of the plane, the wind, you're moving in 3 dimensions, your enemy's moving in 3 dimensions, it's going to be pretty tough. That seems like a bad idea, but that's something that was tried. They tried putting a gun in the back, pointed the other way. That's kind of tough to aim also. Eventually, they were able to figure out how to work the workings of the gun in with the engine of the plane so that the gun would only fire if when there was a gap in the propeller blades. So that solves that problem and allows for greater accuracy, but still they were not very accurate. Poison gas is probably the defining characteristic of World War One in terms of weaponry, just because it was so awful, and the whole war was as well. First used by the Germans at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. The Canadian troops that first felt its effects saw this green cloud moving very slowly towards them. They had no idea what it was, and once it reached them, they'd look around and see their fellow soldiers choking and gagging and coughing and unable to breathe, and then they felt the effects too. And that's about as scary a scenario as I can imagine. First, it was chlorine gas because of the respiratory effects. Eventually, it was mustard gas because it had those respiratory effects, but also would burn the skin. And you'll see some pictures of that coming up. Eventually, it was so bad that both sides kind of stopped. You had to develop a weapon, then you develop a countermeasure. So there are gas masks to counteract that. And so today in modern warfare, poison gas is a pretty big no-no. If somebody uses it, then they're clearly the bad guy. So something to keep in mind. You can see there just the widespread effects. So you got to be mindful of the wind. Obviously, you don't want it to affect your own soldiers. But then you get countermeasures. You get gas masks. Even for messenger dogs, you may get a gas mask. So the effects, though, were pretty severe. You can see the burns on this gentleman's back and the burn on this guy's hand. So pretty bad. Another defining picture of World War I is the line of blinded soldiers with the hand on the soldier in front of them being led to safety. So pretty tragic picture there. We're going to finish with some kind of the blooper reel of World War I technology. These first two pictures are meant to look like dead trees, but are in fact observation and listening posts. On this picture, you can see a cable coming out here, like a telephone line coming out there. So yeah, that's pretty dumb. This artillery gun's made out of wood and paper, and meant as a decoy. I don't know why you wouldn't just put a real gun there, but meant to send the enemy troops in a different direction. So I don't know, pretty stupid also. Body armor seems like a pretty good idea. These flaps would fold down in front so that the person's face was protected, but um, that wasn't really used very much, as you can imagine. This is a listening device for incoming airplanes to hear them from further away. Pretty dumb. And this is an early attempt at a camouflage suit, and clearly this guy is invisible, so this one worked. So just anytime you get new technology, you're going to get some stuff that works, you get some stuff that doesn't work. And those pictures are just kind of, I think, interesting. So um, the new and developed technology is important here, and that'll be one of the trends that we see continuing throughout 2020.